Thank you very much for updating us tonight from Westminster. Well, the Grenfell report has placed renewed focus on flammable building cladding. The Scottish Government was given more than £97 million to carry out removal of potentially harmful cladding on buildings. As of May this year, less than £9 million of this has been spent. A Scottish Government pilot scheme identified around 107 buildings where cladding is due to be removed. About a quarter of all the Scottish buildings where dangerous materials were identified. Well, one person who has direct experience of cladding issues is our next guest. Abjeet Kadwe is a private landlord in Glasgow. One of your properties has been identified, hasn't it, Abjeet, for needing to have the cladding removed. Take us back to the process of buying the flat and what you knew at the time, how quickly you realised there was a problem.
Absolutely. First of all, thanks for having me here.
You're welcome.
Giving
Thank
me
you
a
for
voice.
coming.
Well, I would like to make a small correction there. So it's not just one property. Unfortunately, two of my properties have the same kind of cladding as the Grenfell Tower. So I'll start from the beginning. So I was actually living in London before, and that was where I bought my first house in Ilford, in East London. But work got me here like 2 years later. So 2018 is when I came to Glasgow for work. And that is when I bought my second property in Glasgow, which is the Landsfield Quay development, which is right across the river, one of the most sought after areas. Now, as luck would have it, both of these buildings have actually got the same kind of cladding as the Grenfell Tower, which is ACM Type 4, which is the most flammable cladding. I only realized that 2 years after I purchased the Glasgow flat. And actually, I was shocked to know that. And the pictures of Grenfell Tower just came vividly into my mind. And I sort of, feared for the safety of me and my family, and hence I had to make the tough decision of moving away or moving out from this flat. It did take a while because I was quite reluctant to go in the beginning, but then when I thought that something like Grenfell could happen anytime because we have the exact same issues as Grenfell, I didn't think twice and I made the decision of moving out. Also because I initially contemplated that I could sell the flat or I could even remortgage the flat, but that wasn't the case because with this kind of cladding, the flats are unmortgageable, unsaleable and uninsurable. So as luck would have it, both of my flats are now having this kind of cladding and I'm still waiting. It's been a long wait. I've been waiting for almost 6 years now for something to happen and the remediation works to begin, but it's clearly not started even. Yeah. So it's kind of in the same situation we have on square one.
And others within the building will be in the same position. There is a fire warden now in that building. Has that been any comfort, do you think, to the residents?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak on behalf of all the residents, not just for Landsfield Quay, but I think the whole of Scotland which are affected with this kind of cladding. So yes, I mean, initially there was some comfort that we had the fire wardens in the building who were patrolling the building and there was one per block. So that gave us some sort of peace of mind. But even the fire wardens have now gone away. So there were 20 to begin with. Now they've just come down to 2. But having said that, there are some fire safety measures that have been put in place, like an enhanced fire detection system, which would alert us to the fire and help us rush to safety. Then there is fire alarms, smoke alarms, and all of that. So that just gives us some comfort, but it doesn't go far enough because I think, as they say, it's not over until it's over. So until the last piece of cladding, the panel really gets removed from the building, I don't think we are safe anymore. And I would like to highlight the recent Dagenham fire incident that took place only last week. So even that building was in a similar situation, and it also was undergoing the remediation works, but even then it caught fire. So that just goes to show that you're not safe until the last piece of cladding is taken off the building.
Just briefly, we're about to talk to the Housing Minister.
Sure.
What would you like to say? What would your message be?
My message is the same as everybody who's in this situation, and which is that I think we all feel let down by the government, by the builders, and by the fire authority, and all of them. I feel sorry for the Grenfell Tower residents who have lost their near and dear ones. But I just urge that let's not wait for another tragedy like Grenfell to happen. Let's act fast because you have the £100 million that have been set aside. Only I was hearing the news before. Only 9 million has been used so far. So why is it taking so long? Are you waiting for another disaster to happen? So yeah.
Abjeet, thank you so much for coming in tonight. And listening to Abjeet, as I just said, is the Housing Minister, Paul McLennan. He joins us now. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for making the time. Let's just pick up on what Abjeet just had to say there. Why has the Scottish Government been so slow to use this money?
I think there's a number of things, Laura. Obviously, we were given the consequentials from the UK government. I think there's a different tenure that we have in Scotland as compared with England and Wales. And I think that the main thing, obviously, there needs to be a robust technical assessment taking place in the buildings, and that's what we're doing. I think the person before had just mentioned about Lansfield Quay and so on. So it's working with the developers. It's doing the robust technical assessments and to make sure exactly what we need to do.
Does it take
Because
7 years to do those
no,
assessments?
and I think, I think when the bill passed, you'd said that earlier on, and when the bill passed, I acknowledged we needed to quicken the pace at that particular time. And I think we're obviously trying to prioritise the buildings that need done as soon as possible in terms of this. The bill that you mentioned before does give us that ability, for example, to try and, for example, remove cars from buildings which we didn't have the ability to do before. We have the ability to quicken the pace with developers who obviously play a key part in terms of that as well. And before we would need, I suppose, the requirement for everybody to agree to the work being carried out, every single resident. Now we don't need that. So the bill that is brought forward gives us ability to move things quicker at a pace as well. And I think as the resident mentioned, one of the key things is to try and make sure the buildings are safe. We mentioned about the wake and watch and other things around about fire alarms and so on. So
But
we're
do
working
you
with
understand the
developers.
frustration of those affected?
Of course I do.
That it's taken all this time and the fear. We've just heard Abhijit talk about, the fear of trying to live in one of these buildings.
Yeah, of course I do. And I've met residents in Lansfield Quay. I've met residents in other buildings as well, and spoken to them about that. And of course we recognise the fear. Obviously, we work very closely with factors, for example, and also with the developers to make sure the buildings are as safe as they possibly can be. Waking watch was mentioned, alarms was mentioned. So, we're trying to work with the developers and residents as much as we possibly can and communicate to them to make sure they're safe until the work gets carried out as
Can
soon
you
as
guarantee
we
those
can.
people are safe right now that are living in these 107 at-risk buildings?
I think when we said that around about the wake and watch, there's assessments carried out on their safety. So we work very closely with developers and factors in terms of that. I'm confident we're as safe as we can be in terms of the context before the cladding is removed. We look at wake and watch, we look at alarms in terms of that, in discussions with residents also on that. So I acknowledge we need to move at a quicker pace. Now the bill that was brought forward in May gives us ability, I think, to do that. And I think we've worked very closely with developers as well, and obviously much of the funding that comes from the remediation comes from the developers themselves. So part of the discussions we've had to undertake with them is making sure that they have what they call a remediation contract, that they undertake that and commit to that legally to allow us to do that. So that's been progressing over the last number of months to make sure that they carry out the work as soon as they
Do
possibly
you have
can.
a target then, a time target for when all of these buildings will end up being made safe?
I think one of the targets we had was trying to get all the buildings, the 170 you mentioned before, on a pathway. So that's making
So
sure
how
that
many have been dealt with so far?
there's 30 at the moment on the pilot program. I think there's 5 that are actually undergoing work at the moment. Where we committed
How
to
many have been
trying all.
completed?
There's just the one building that's
One
been
building.
completed, and one building that's been completed just now. And I acknowledge that the pace needs to quicken up, and I think that's why we brought in the cladding bill in terms of that to try and
So
quicken
the
the pace
bill's
of that. And there
introduced,
are.
the money is there, the will is there. So when can you pledge to do this by?
Well, as I said, I think one of the key things is getting what they call the single building assessments carried out on all the buildings, just to allow us to make sure we know exactly what the work's required. Every building is different in terms of what it actually requires, both internal and external. So we need that robust technical assessment that's agreed with the residents, which is agreed with the developers themselves. Once that's in place, obviously we can try and move as quickly as possible. So the key target for us at the moment is to try and get the single building assessment carried out for all these buildings, underline if what's required in these buildings, and get moving as soon as we quickly can on that. And obviously this is part of the pilot programme. We then need to move on and learn lessons from this pilot programme as we look at other buildings and move on in terms of that. So, but there is a real determination, as I said, to get each of these buildings onto the single building assessment pathway, work with developers as much as we possibly can, because they're obviously key partners in this as well, and obviously keep the communication with the residents. And as I said, I've met with a number of residents groups and residents themselves to discuss the issues that they've raised.
Is there a level of shame in the government for how long this is taking?
I don't think it's a level of shame. I think when you looked at some of the Grenfell inquiry findings today, it mentioned in the UK has not moved quick enough. And I said that, I understand people's frustration in terms of that. We have now the bill in place which should allow us to move at a
Okay.
quicker pace.
Okay.
And we give that commitment to try and move as quickly as we possibly can on that.
Paul McLennan, thank you very much indeed for joining us
Thank
tonight
you.
on The Nine. Meanwhile, the